Howdy, friends. Welcome to Space Café. Welcome to Black Ops by Ralph Thiele. You are invited to ride with us the space wave with LEOs and MEOs. Hundreds and thousands of very capable satellites are about to travel to space, ready to engage. We will discuss with thrilling guests implications for security and defense. Join us for 60 minutes. We count on you.
Thanks for that. Welcome to our first session of our Space Café Black Ops by Ralph Thiele. As we decided not to use Zoom today, we've chosen Livestorm on this format. Please let us know your experience from the registration to the live event. We would appreciate that very much. As you're taking your seats in our virtual Space Café, I would like to begin with some housekeeping items. We are recording this webinar session and we will make it live in a few days on SpaceWatch.Global. We are not streaming this Space Café WebTalk today. If you would like to ask a question, please use the question section on the right side of the screen as shown here. You can open that window on the small arrow right up there. If you hit the question tab, you will be able to type your question and send it over to us. You also can vote for questions, and I will handle these questions later. I'm Thorsten Kriening, publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. We are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and the Space Café podcast. So episode 15 featuring Simonetta Di Pipo just got released earlier this week. We also opened our fan shop online where you can support us actively and become a space watcher. Edition 1 has cool mugs, masks, awesome t-shirts for you, your friends, and the ones you love. Your support needed to keep our independent journalism alive. I can't repeat it enough. We need your support for what we do for you. If you've missed any of the previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the event section and on YouTube. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to hand over to your host today, Ralph Thiele. Over to you, Ralph. You are muted.
Thank you, Thorsten, and thank you very much for setting up this format, and thank you for the introduction. Howdy, everybody, and welcome to Black Ops. We want to look at space security from several perspectives: space warfare, hybrid warfare, threats, space sustainability, space safety, and space security. And this format appears to be a very thrilling one. I'm so glad that all of you found the way in. Today is LEO and MEO wave, the number one, where we want to talk about and start discussing implications for security and defense. We have, as promised, two thrilling guests. You have seen that in the invitation, which is Alexandra from RUSI, with a broad background and in particular very deep into policy issues. We have John Munoz Atkinson from SES, dealing with global governments, and he has been a brigade commander, really knowing what the people on the ground know and need from space. And of course, he has a long time now dealing with governmental business, so he knows it from all sides. So we have two really exciting guests with us. All of you are in principle aware about MEO, and it's as being between 2 and 36,000 kilometers from Earth. You know that the GPS and Galileo are there, and O3b MEO satellites, which John will certainly cover. We talk about low Earth orbits, a very thrilling development. When you look at that, we had more or less 2,000 satellites being active in the past years, and now comes Elon Musk and has put another 900 up front, and we have a couple of others joining in, and a perspective of perhaps having further 70,000 satellites in space in the LEO orbit. And all of them want to contribute to business prosperity, but also to defense and security related issues. So this is quite a big order that we are looking at. Defense and space, I know, dealing a lot with the space community is nothing that comes naturally across the lips of those engineers that are dealing with space assets, at least not too many. Yet space is really critical to prosperity and security. And I had a marvelous meeting, lunch actually, with a small group with Florence Parly, the French Minister of the Armed Forces, in February this year. And I just want to quote two things she said during this lunch. The first one was, we are in danger. Our communications, our military exercises, our daily lives are in danger if we do not react. And why? Today, she said, our allies and adversaries are militarizing our outer space. And as the time for resilience is getting shorter and shorter, we must act, we must be ready. And in fact, if you look at business as a security, the C4ISR system, command, computer, communications, cyber, and intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, this spectrum, this backbone actually resides in space. No space functions, no viable space functions, and a lot of our business and a lot of our security actually is gone. There are actors out there. Florence Parly was in particular referring to a Russian satellite getting close to a European satellite in 2018. And I understand this as a kind of wake-up call to many, so not just in France or Europe, but all over the world. In principle, nations, agencies, industry are getting aware things are going out there, and we have this splendid opportunity today to discuss the issues. So from there, I would right away go into business that in the end will also live from your questions as you come up with them. And I would like to ask both, and I would start in this case with John and then Alexandra, first to give their views on the issues, also on their backgrounds. So where are we standing with MIOS and LEOs with the wave? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges out there, so that we have a starting platform to continue our discussion from there? John, please.
Thank you, Ralph. First of all, let me say it's good to be with you all this morning. I'm talking to you from Washington, D.C. on a rainy, gloomy day. As Ralph has said, I served in the U.S. military before coming to the satellite industry in 2008. I've done 13 years of enlisted time and 21 years as an officer, so 34 years. And the reason I bring that up is that means I've started at the very bottom, and I've had to do the tougher jobs and work my way up. That gave me an insight. And as a brigade commander, and even as I am today, when someone wants to talk to me technically about what a satellite can do, I have to be very honest with you, I don't care. Okay? What I care about is the effects. Our customers care about effects. What will communications allow them to do? Ralph already mentioned C6 ISR because it's the standard C4, but it's the inclusion of cyber as well as combat systems into an ecosystem or architecture for nations and persons on the ground to get information that is actionable. So I joined, as I said, the satellite industry in 2008. I was with Inmarsat, so for about 5 years. And then I went to the little-known startup at that time known as O3B. And I was there before the first launch. So it was interesting times as a startup and going in and convincing people that we were real on a PowerPoint slide. Well, today, fast forward 6 years, we're real. We have 20 satellites up in orbit in MEO. We are the only constellation in medium Earth orbit. That you have GEO, then you go MEO, then LEO that we're talking about today. We, because we were the first in the non-geosynchronous orbit, have primacy over the frequencies in Ka that we operate on, which means someone comes into our band, they have to talk with us and ensure that we are not hindered in our communications or getting interference. And that's a huge point. So, as I said, we started in 2014. We now have 20 satellites in orbit. Each satellite has 20 gigabits of capacity on it, but we didn't stop there. As in government, when a government buys a procurement, they usually sit on it for 15, 20, 30 years. You have to look at the procurement cycle and then actually once it's in light. So we have already procured our second generation at SES. SES is the only satellite operator that has both MEO and GEO. And that's an important aspect when one looks at resiliency and redundancy within a combat systems and in communications. Additionally, under mPOWER, which launches next year, I told you our current satellites have 20 gigabits of capacity. Our new satellites will have 200 gigabits of capacity on them. Additionally, today we have 10 steerable beams. Under mPOWER, each satellite will have up to 5,000 steerable beams. Today we can do about 1.2 gigabits to a 2.4 meter antenna. In the future's next year, 2021, we're looking at 9 gigabits to a 2.4 meter antenna. To a 30 centimeter antenna, we're looking at 100 megabits. All of this is important as we are going from an informational age to a digital age and the ability to pass information rapidly. But let me say this. There is a place for GEO, MEO, and LEO. Each one has their own attributes, and you shouldn't go on just one constellation, but look at the spectrum of what you're trying to achieve. Ralph brought up another great point. Back in 1960, there were only 200 active satellites in orbit. By the year 2000, there's 2,000 active satellites. Did some quick checking this morning. OneWeb is planning 650 satellites. Telesat in LEO's 292 satellites. Amazon is planning for 3,236 satellites. And SpaceX has approval right now to go to 12,000 satellites in LEO with an anticipation of going to 30,000. Why is that important? As Ralph has said, and I participated in a NATO study on HTS satellites and vulnerabilities just last year. When you have an accident in space, there is space debris. The effects of a collision, and we had one, if you'll remember, several years ago between a Russian satellite and a Iridium satellite. The effects in LEO are dramatic. And if you want, please contact Ralph. I've shared with him some information on that. But the important thing is, LEO is going to be congested. So I now turn it over to Alexander to say the LEO, there's great capability there. So Alexander, over to you.
Just a moment, Alexandra, what a wonderful transition with this space debris. But in fact, something that is really particular when you look at all these LEO initiatives is that the UK government obviously found it important to get engaged and have it. Is that a kind of a global reach? Is it a kind of national habit that's coming up? What are the benefits that you see from your side, your background, Alexandra?
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me today. Really good to be with you this afternoon. So I'm going to offer a few perspectives from the UK, just to say, in case anyone's not familiar with RUSI, we are an independent think tank. I do work closely with the MOD, the government and industry, but we are independent. So these are my views. So yeah, perspective of the UK, but I think a lot of the questions that the UK is facing at the moment, what we're going through, is actually relevant to a lot of other countries as well. You may be aware the UK is moving forward quite quickly now in space. Earlier this year, we saw the appointment of a new director of space in the Ministry of Defence. And this government has also been very clear that space is important. We're looking at the potential creation of UK Space Command, lots of talks about big national programs. A lot of you may have seen some of the conversations earlier in the year, the UK buying a stake in OneWeb and what that might mean. And it's interesting, you know, what John started off with talking about is some of the similar points I want to make, is that we think about space and what we need to be doing in space, but it's always important to bring that back to why. What are the requirements? What are we actually getting from space? And if you think about it in a defense perspective, and for the UK thinking about investment and what capabilities we might look at acquiring and what constellations we might put in LEO, it always has to come down to what is the benefit for operations? What is the benefit for the military? And so I like to break it down rather than looking at it in what space capabilities do we need. It's what communications abilities do we need? What are our ISR requirements? And then where does space fit into those architectures? And I think that way you're thinking a lot more about the users of space and the information you're getting. So by bringing it into that, you know, it allows for us to understand how space connects through all of those aspects of defense, rather than looking at it too much in a silo. And I think in the UK, you know, perhaps, and a lot of other countries, that was a failure. It didn't, that understanding of the importance of space didn't really permeate through all those other areas. And, you know, we start to think then, okay, if we are going to move into this, how does that affect our acquisition methods? How does that affect what the UK might want to do with launch and the partnerships then internationally with launch? How does that affect the relationship of defence with the commercial and civil sector in the UK? Because that is also something that's being pushed forward quite a lot. And again, thinking about requirements, if the UK is looking at a major national programme to show its standing and its desire to be an international space power, that still has to be rooted in a benefit. There's no point just putting up a lot of satellites to say we have this big space program if they're not providing a real benefit. But of course, you know, we don't act on our own in space either. We have alliances. And again, we have to put those requirements and what the UK intends to do within the context of those alliances. And we do rely very heavily on allies at the moment for space capabilities. So there's a thought then of, if we are going to invest more in LEO, for example, how does that actually add value to those partnerships and those alliances? We don't just want to replicate what others are doing, but we want to make sure that we are a seat at the table, that it is a more equal relationship. So particularly with the US and looking at how we can add value to that, how does the UK fit within the NATO space architecture and other NATO member states who also have space capabilities? And how might that change in the future? Again, looking at what our priorities will be going forward. Are we looking at the high north, for example? Is that somewhere that we need to be paying more attention to? How is the US position on the Pacific and China going to change those relationships? And therefore, what do we need to add, and what gaps can we fill in those alliances? And of course, on the other side, you have those questions about the management of LEO, and it's getting more congested and contested that we hear about all the time, and the need for space traffic management and how we again, how we can fit into that broader environment. And the UK is playing a much bigger role now internationally in these conversations around responsible behavior, responsible norms of behavior, some of those questions within the UN as well, with the disarmament and arms control community. And so for the UK, taking that lead role, it has to be balanced as well against what capabilities we might want to acquire, how we act with different allies. We have some countries going down a much more space as a warfighting domain path, and others looking at it space as an operational domain. So where does the UK fit in that, and how does that balance against the more diplomatic route and some of those questions that it's going down? So there are so many different aspects, I suppose, when you start thinking about LEO, and for a country like the UK trying to increase its standing as a space power, that it's not just about, we want to put more satellites in LEO, we want to have these programs, because it is a much more complex environment. And I think, again, just picking up on a point that John made, LEO does have benefits. We understand that. We know that smaller satellites can be cheaper, they can be easier to replace. You can move much faster in terms of what capabilities you're looking at, but it is part of that bigger architecture, both terrestrial and with the different orbits in space, and what each of them can bring to what you're actually trying to achieve. And I just want to come back to that final point. It is, why are we putting satellites into space? It always has to come down to what are the requirements, what do the users want, and how can we best use the opportunities that LEO presents to achieve what we need to achieve. And I'll finish my first opening remarks there.
So thank you both very, very much. We now have the arc from the from the boots on the ground to the high policy among continents in principle and nations as we go on there. Some of you may have followed this conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia last couple of days, weeks. Something very shaking happened actually when you followed it. Azerbaijan, with a little help from Turkey and building on drone capabilities, actually knocked out something like 150 tanks, 50 armored vehicles, and 300 more vehicles with radar, missile, and other capabilities on board. Drones fly via data. They deliver their data, they get their data, and if they are not very short breath, they deliver these data through space. So in principle, space assets help to communicate the data that you need. Space assets deliver possibly target information also from moving targets. So drones obviously may have a very bad impact on the situations as they develop on battlefields. Now, coming back to MEOS, LEOs, are they critical enablers? Are they also enablers? How do they play into these obviously changing situations in real wartime situations? Perhaps I'll start with you, John, again.
Okay, first of all, let me say that are drones important? Yes, but what's really important is the information and insights gained from the drones. So the real issue is how do you distribute that information in a network environment? And by that I mean, you have the sensors that pick up a drone. Then you have the anti-jamming sensors. Then you also have, say, a global hawk that would be watching a swarm coming in. And then you have the commander on the ground. How are you synchronizing all those components to get an effect of either destroying a swarm or mitigating the effects of that swarm on you? And that's really the more critical question, is the architecture behind the satellites. I'm going to give you a perfect example. All right. SES back in 2015 through 03B, we put on a MEO onto a warship, okay, and it was operationalized. It was great. It was phenomenal. 650 megabits, all right? No problems. The problem came when we tried to put the 650 megabits into a government architecture, and they gave us a 512 kilobit pipe to jam 655 megabits through. As we can all realize, it didn't work, all right? So we are making leaps and bounds in space. I mean, LEOs are gonna come in with huge capabilities. MEOs were already there, but are the governments planning the entire network? And by that I mean, yeah, we deliver it to them, but then how are they distributing that information? That is really becoming a more critical piece of the pie, is the distribution of this information in real time and at the level needed. All right, so Alexander, over to you.
No, John, I don't leave you out at this moment. So how does MEO support this now? How does it work in this architecture? What contributions does it bring?
Look, it works fine. Let me tell you, there's I'm going to use a couple examples for people that are using Office 365 out there. That, you know, I'm going to relate it to things that we use on a daily basis. Okay, you need less than 300 milliseconds of latency for it to work effectively. People are talking about going to the cloud. Latency matters, okay? So MEO and LEO resolve a latency issue. For MEO, we're about 150 milliseconds. For LEO, they're at 35 milliseconds. That's from the terminal satellite back down and back, all right? So you're gonna, the human mind, believe it or not, only can take about 200 milliseconds of information, all right? So we're going to information overload, which then rolls you into AI, artificial intelligence, and the ability for computers, but you still need a person in the loop, I would argue. So LEO is going to allow for the artificial intelligence to take off in ways that we haven't seen. But can we, the human being, take that information and integrate it at that rate? That's another more serious question, okay? So there's no problem, Ralph, there's no problem. LEO, MEO, they're gonna deliver the capability, okay? We're doing it today. It's on ISR sensors, 200, 300 megabits to a plane moving at 600 miles an hour, done. On ships, done. On land, done. Multiple sensors. There's a term known as mission command, which is the integration really of C6 ISR and giving the commanders from a strategic, operational, and tactical level the pictures they need. That's being done today. What you're going to find out is actually when people go to from the geo architecture, if you will, to a MEO or LEO, they're not going to have to modify commercial programs to make it work to handle the latency. Latency is resolved at that point. The other thing that I will say is that MEO, there's a standard, a terrestrial standard. It's known as MEF, Metro Ethernet Form. It is a terrestrial standard that sets, this is what you have to do for a telco. MEO already meets that. We're the only operator that does. So if we do it, LEOs will absolutely do it, which means you're going to be able to extend the network of your terrestrial component. So it's like you're in your office in London or wherever, okay?
Okay, thank you very much, John. Now to Alexandra. So in principle, we learn that MEO is well fit in into this systemic challenge that we have. Obviously, we have learned that Elon Musk is getting with Starlink operational. Now he needed the 700 plus. He has now 900 LEOs out there, and as I understand, he also has a Pentagon contract with that. So means this crowd of LEO satellites is getting operational. It may take some time, but it's getting operational. So looking here now at the European environment, in principle, it is very importantly UK with OneWeb that will contribute. So where are we standing there? Where are we moving forward? What are the approaches that you see?
I just want to quickly pick up on something, what John was saying before, and I think that word integration is so important when we're thinking about all of this. Is that we've seen some really interesting stuff in the UK where the Carbonite satellite, the RAF had about the real-time video from space and talks about ambition to have that video straight in the cockpit of fighter planes. And again, it is about thinking, yes, we can have all this information, we can have all of these satellites, but how are we using it? And putting that again into, I guess, more of a context is that, how is that being put out through militaries? But again, thinking about that like in a NATO context, when the space assets are operated by member states, they're not really owned by NATO. So again, it is about that integration. I think it's so complicated now with the numbers of satellites going up. And again, we have to think too about what are those satellites providing, because satellites that are providing internet, that's slightly different to satellites involved in ISR or communications in terms of how we're using that information and how we process all of that. And I guess for me, it's just it's a case of sometimes taking a step back. I see a lot of, I think I mentioned earlier that LEO is sometimes seen as sort of the panacea. It's like, oh, we can do everything in LEO now. Yes, we have GNSS satellites in MEO. Yes, we have communication satellites in GEO, but look at everything that we can do in LEO. And we do just need to take a step back and think, well, what are the broader impacts of all of that? Whether that is, spectrum, the crowding of certain orbits, and then everything that comes with that in terms of traffic management, in terms of domain awareness, and ensuring that we're not just doing it because everyone else is doing it. And sometimes it seems that there's a fear of being left behind when someone says, oh, certain, they're going in this direction. All these people are creating a GNSS constellation, therefore we must have our own. Instead of, again, looking at, none of us is acting on our own in space. There are partnerships, there are alliances. So I guess it's being, just very strategic about what decisions we're making. And I think also importantly, again, putting this into the NATO context, even if you're not a space actor, you use space, you are getting benefits from space. And so I think everyone has a responsibility to play their part in terms of the sustainability of orbit and safety in orbit. So I think there's a huge amount with all of these constellations going up and all the challenges that come with that, to think about how they can contribute to space traffic management, space situational awareness with the surveillance of orbit, intelligence, and also about that data processing and that integration, and how, and I know I keep coming back to it, but it's just such an important point. It doesn't matter how many satellites are up there, it's what you're doing with the information, it's how you're processing it and how you're able to give it and give the right information to the people that need it on the ground. So so many different threads to think about.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra. Now let's come to a specific issue, cyber. When you, in principle, you think there is a fence in space, at least it has been for decades, because the satellites were so distant, so cyber used to be not a particular issue there. This is now today principally different. When you look into recent studies that look up there, in principle, they discover hole after hole with regard to satellites and dealing with them. So there obviously is no fence in space. We have a lot of access to do, and there's a lot of access possible. And what does it actually mean with regard to security utilities of LEOs and MEOs as we look up there? How can they deal with cyber threats? Because obviously we must be aware that somebody will attempt to take our satellite systems out of action. So how are MEOs and LEOs in principle set up to cover cyber threats? How are they evolving? What is the situation looking at this? Again, John, please, if you have the first word on it.
Okay, I guess what I would like to say is a general comment. When you talk cyber, today, as an example, SES, who owns a GEO and MEO fleet, we get cyber all the time attacks, all right? So the issue is, when it comes to cyber, is the ability to detect and then to respond, all right? You're not going to be able to prevent a cyber attack. I mean, they happen. People are prodding our systems all the time. It's your ability to detect and respond that are important. And then a database that you report to, so you governments start putting together a picture as to who's doing what to whom. Okay, that's important. But any information system is vulnerable to cyber attacks. We see it here in the US all the time, whether it's a voting system or credit card systems or whatever. So again, I go back to it's your ability to detect and to respond, all right? And that becomes even more complex when you're talking about sovereign systems, because some nations would obviously say that's an act of war when you attack our systems. We're a commercial company. We take cyber extremely serious because it's our bottom line it affects. It's revenue. So we have a very active process involved, and I can't go into it other than to say we've been very lucky. Okay? Alex?
Ralph, you're muted.
Back on back on the microphone again. So this is a very thrilling issue. In fact, when I look now, MEOS versus LEOs, but the MEOS, at least the O3B MEOS, the only ones we have at present to talk about, are more or less designed to fit well into, what should I say, challenged environments. So from there you are by design already to a degree protected. Still, cyber issues are issues. When I now look into the LEO issue as such, where we want to have a very broad private business coming on with that, where we have a diversity of applications that come up with that, cyber could be even a larger issue. And yet when I listen to Elon Musk, who says mass makes it, because we'll have so many out there that we can deal with the issues as they come. So a little bit now asking to you, how would the LEOs do with cyber challenges? Is there any perspective, Alexandra, that you can provide to the issue from the LEO side?
Yeah, I always think it's quite difficult when we just use the term cyber, because so much comes under it. So I think, again, there are a lot of aspects to it. And I think, you know, if we're just thinking about the commercial sector, there's an education that's required, that it's not just state-owned or military space assets that might be targeted. You know, whether that's because commercial satellites are providing, you know, dual use capability and providing something to militaries, or just because, you know, that it might be more about economic attack. And again, you know, in the UK, I've seen often there's a lot about, you know, we're trying to grow the sector, so we want more companies joining the sector and building this, and small company startups. And it's all, again, it's all about the opportunities. It's all about what you can do and how you can make money. And so sometimes we just need to, there is that sense of what do you actually need to do? And you do have to understand that the security situation. And I think there's a lot then around supply chains and what standards can you make sure that you're putting into supply chains, so that every satellite, every space asset at least is meeting some sort of minimum requirements. But also, again, it's not just thinking about attacks in space, and you know, rather than, this is why I think we use the term counter space capability, you know, rather than something like space weapon, is because it's the whole chain, it's every link in the chain, and that is including, you know, a cyber attack against a company, against a ground control station. So it's not just the satellites themselves. So you have to think about that. But I think also when we're thinking cyber attack, you know, what is the attack trying to achieve? And is it about disabling a satellite? Is it taking control? Is it denying information? And each of those has a different effect. And I think we need to approach all of those slightly differently as well, rather than just in this sort of umbrella term of cyber, because the impacts are different, and then how you might respond is going to be quite different in each case. And you know, yeah, we know that cyber effects are happening in space. We're aware of them. But do we just accept that, I think, as part of, you know, this sort of sub-threshold, so-called grey zone activity that we see going on everywhere? It's not just happening in space, it's happening in every domain. And if it is going to be something that's common, that happens quite frequently, is it then something that we want to say that was an act of aggression, and we need to respond? Because, you know, the chances then potentially for escalation or for a much more sort of pervasive competition, you know, starts? Or is it just, okay, we know that there are going to be attempts at cyber activity, offensive cyber activity against our space systems. So it's less about necessarily how do we respond or have they crossed a line, but more how do we mitigate that? And by accepting it, what redundancies do we put in place throughout our entire architectures to ensure that information channels aren't lost, or, you know, that there are backups? So I'm just quite loath to necessarily say a cyber attack needs to necessarily be responded to in a certain manner. I think that there are many layers to it, and so it's not really a black or white question.
Yes.
Ralph, I'd like to,
yes, please.
To say thank Alexandra for what she brought up. You keep talking about the satellite. The satellite is but one small piece of the ecosystem. All right. I've played in many exercises where I've been the Red Force. And if I do asymmetrical fights, meaning if I want to take out the communications, do I hit a satellite? No. I'll hit the electrical grid that supports the ground infrastructure that does the terrestrial backhaul back to a center. That will blind you. You don't have to take out a satellite to blind a country or a business. small asymmetrical non-kinetic threats are as effective as anything. All right. And so, you know, when we focus on the satellite, please understand that it's just but one small piece of it. And they're built very rugged, and there's redundant systems on each satellite. But the Achilles heel really is what's on the ground, whether it's our gateways, whether it's the terrestrial fiber connections from gateways to POPs, whether it's computer systems in your ops centers or computer systems that you, a military, are using, and your own connectivity. So fully agree with Alexandra. It's much more holistic. The threat is more to not necessarily the satellite, but the ecosystem of the ground infrastructure.
Fantastic, fantastic. In fact, I did myself research on vulnerability vectors and found with SAS, Sean, by the way, and found something like 75. So there obviously are vulnerability vectors that we can look at and have to look at. Now coming back from this attack spectrum to all the other things. In principle, when we look at space, we look at communications, intelligence, positioning, navigation, space situational awareness, space weather, early warning. I will have a particular question on early warning in a way. So where would you see the particular benefits or the spectrum of benefits from MEO and LEO dealing with these issues? Because of course it's communication, but surely it's not just communication. We discussed ISR already. John.
I have to go back to the satellite, whether MEO or LEO, is nothing more than, if you will, a pipe. It's a bent pipe that you can send information through, all right? There's no issues, as a general rule, on the pipe. When you're looking at sensors, it's the different types of sensors that matter. You know, some people say, can you detect stealth from space? You know, I'm sure they've got imaging satellites up there that look at air movement and would be able to say, oh, the air is moving and these molecules are moving at this rate, and so consequently there must be something there. It's much more about the technology that this level of communication will enable, all right? We, whether MEO, LEO, or even GEO, are enablers of technologies for the various customers to get the effects they desire. So if they desire ISR, you know, it's do our platforms work appropriately? Is the latency and the throughput what they need to achieve? Okay, so those are being answered today and being done today. What we've seen is that, at least a US perspective, you know, 720, then it went to 1080p, now we're 4K. Well, all that bandwidth just sucks up more bandwidth, but people want the clarity. So as technology evolves, what's important is, from a satellite industry, that we don't tie ourselves to one technology over another, that we're open source and allow this bent pipe to carry it all right? Meaning you encrypt it at your end, you de-encrypt it at your end, we're the pipe that brings you the information you need. It's being done today.
Okay, thanks. Alexandra, any comment from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think, you know, if you're looking at LEO and you're thinking about the benefits of it, it is because you can respond faster to changes in technology, advances in that, and in requirements. So, you know, rather than a 20-year program, you know, developing something, you know, it's a huge amount of money, the time it takes, and then, you know, its lifespan, you know, thinking about something, putting it in GEO, to, you know, like, yeah, you have a pipe, you have almost like, you know, you could say you have an off the shelf, you know, basic satellite, and you add to it what you require. You know, if it's optical or another type of sensor, for example, and, you know, you're responding to that and you can respond much faster. And I think that's where the benefit comes from. It is about, yes, how you're getting the information you need faster, more effectively to the right people, that is responsive to outside effects. And I think for me, that's where the real benefit to LEO comes. Again, accepting that is not the only part of it. It is still, you know, within a larger architecture. So yeah, we have the benefits, but again, you know, put it into the broader perspective.
Okay, thanks a lot. So when I understand it right, Thorsten, you have Space Watcher questions.
No, we have questions from our audience. That's more important than our questions. So yeah, thank you everyone for sending in questions. So first one for Alexandra from Laurent. On the response side, are you seeing growth in legal or regulatory activity to help actors keep pace with reality? Do you think this aspect needs more attention?
Definitely needs more attention. You know, anyone who's worked in the field of, you know, regulation or what's happening legally in space, you know, arms control, all of that, we are behind the curve. You know, everything's moved forward much faster than we've been able to keep pace with. A lot more is needed, but yeah, we have to think, and again, there's no sort of one size fits all to all of this. And, you know, again, you know, coming back to the cyber side, yes, you can talk about minimum standards. You can talk about, you know, supply chains and what commercial actors need to do, and whether, you know, you can integrate that into different regulatory processes. But I think, you know, we start to think, you know, what are the effects? How do you respond? You know, is it what legal right does one actor have to respond to another one? And those are questions that, you know, we're facing constantly with all of the capabilities in space. And I think, again, you have to break it down into effect, because some effects will be more a nuisance. They'll be minimal. You know, they might not last for very long, and there's going to be some effects that are much more persistent, that you feel much deeper. And again, you have to then think about, well, what's the relationship on the ground, because this is not just happening in space either. You know, an activity during what you might call peacetime might just be a nuisance, but if you know, those two actors are, you know, in a period of crisis or potential conflict, that activity could be taken much differently. So we do need to be thinking about these questions. It is getting more attention, but there's still a long way to go.
Great, thank you. There's another one from Brian Harvey on the same line, and I will open it up to also to John. How should cyber attacks in space be punished? I mean, that goes along what you just started with, Alex. So, John, with a request for a short answer, and I know it's almost impossible to answer it shortly.
No, it is. One word. It depends. Okay.
Aren't there two already? I'm German. Sorry for that. Being that precise. Okay, Alex, something from your end to add?
Yeah, exactly. How serious is the effect? You know, what, as I said, you know, just a hack into a satellite, just because they can, should that be punished? Maybe not, but you know, if you're thinking about a potential worst case scenario of a cyber attack against a satellite with maneuvering capabilities and you want to start maneuvering it yourself, yeah, that's quite a bit more serious, and the consequences, are potentially much worse. So it depends.
I would like to say something, and Alexandra, you brought it up. The idea, we keep looking at this as a sovereign issue at some point, that if they attack a sovereign satellite. First and foremost, most developed nations know where everyone's satellite is. I know that we've had the Chinese launch some stuff. I know the Russians sent up a satellite, and Intelsat got all upset because it was parking next to it, didn't know what was going on. But the reason I say this is that when it comes to commercial satellites, all right, we're hiding in the open, and governments are using us, and we're hiding in the open. It will be a lot harder to take out a MEO and a LEO than it is to take out a GEO, because they're just traveling around the globe. All right, so we get concerned about the sovereign issue and attacking. I would like to also say this. When we look at the military is always the last resource. There's something I learned a long time ago at a senior service college. It was called the DIME: Diplomatic, Information, Military, and Economic Effects. If you think of this, satellites enable the entire spectrum of a nation's power, whether it's their diplomatic effort, whether it's information or economic efforts, to develop less fortunate nations and to bring up the inequalities around the world. I think that we need to be looking at what satellites bring to the entire kit bag of a nation in helping. Not only just, yes, we do the military stuff and we do it really well, but there's other things that LEO and MEO are bringing that are game-changing, from an education, e-commerce, e-health, which is going to change a lot in this world.
Thank you, John. The last question I will pick here and then handing back to you, Ralph. It's a 3-star question, so it got 3 votes from our good friend Angela Mattis from our think tank Mass in Edinburgh. What is the best way to get cooperation worldwide on managing this domain, SSA, I assume? Some feel by creating trusted SSA commercial services, this will result in observance. What are your thoughts on that? John, Ali, so
I think we already cooperate today through the ITU when it comes to satellites across from a commercial as well as governmental standpoint. But I would say this, that commercial satellite operators, it's about the money, okay? It's about making revenue. And we have to keep our birds up, and we have to be always on the cutting edge. We are much more responding to change. Moore's Law says every 18 months, there's a significant change, all right? Think about government satellites. They plan them for 10, 15 years. They're up for 20 years. They've gone through 10 or 15 cycles of Moore's Law. Satellite operators, we're launching all the time. We're replenishing the fleet all the time. So I think that what you're going to end up seeing is there is great cooperation right now within the commercial industry. I'm going to use an example, and it's well known. Intelsat lost a bird last year. Okay, through a cooperation agreement, SES and other operators restored all their customers on our satellite systems, but it's, from the customer standpoint, it's Intelsat. We have cooperation today at a huge level, whether it's sharing cyber attacks, whether it's sharing information on technologies and vulnerabilities. That's going on today because it's in the best interest of our shareholders and on generating that revenue.
And the question was about the SSA services, the commercial ones. Ali?
Yeah, I'll come in. So I think for me, you know, yeah, we've seen SSA move from a much more kind of national program, military to more commercial, and I think that's incredibly positive. And so for a lot of the, you know, having been involved in some discussions and you know, seen what happens internationally, if you look at the UN, you look at the you know, arms control discussions, you know, getting that international cooperation can be incredibly difficult. So bringing the commercial sector in and giving them more of a leading role in that cooperation, I think can help, and they can work better together, and just ensuring that there's an environment for them to work and share information, so that you do have that ability to corroborate you know, what you've seen happen, to provide another viewpoint of something that's happened. And again, it's about alliances. You know, we see it happening within Five Eyes. We see that through, you know, the role of the US Air Force and bringing in Five Eyes, I think, plus France and Germany. And I think, again, you know, there could be a real role here for NATO as it looks at how it's going to implement space as an operational domain, you know, so bringing in those countries who aren't necessarily space actors, but giving them a role and creating a really collaborative system that enables the commercial actors as well to try and better work together to manage it. Because unless we're talking to each other, unless we're sharing all of that information, again, you can have all the actors looking at it, unless you're using the information properly, you're not going to be able to manage the environment particularly well.
Thank you. Ralph, back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we crossed our 60 minutes. We promised. I think we actually did it. So we promised thrilling guests, and I really must say, wonderful. Thank you both very much, Alexandra, John. This was striking. It was convincing. It was enriching. So exactly that what we want to provide through this series, and I'm so glad to have you here in this format to open this series of Black Ops. So from there, heartfelt thank you. I think what you did is you answered wonderfully important questions, and you made a hunger for more questions. So this is a good reason to continue. Thanks again. Also thanks to you, Thorsten, for setting this up. And then in particular, of course, thanks to the audience and also on getting engaged. I think this was really something that we can look forward to also in the future. Thank you very much. Back to you.
So we have a few more announcements, and thank you, Ralph, for this great first session of the Black Ops series, and thank you also from my side to Ali and to John. So on the, can I have the slides, please? Yeah, thank you. Our next special formats. So we will start our Space Café Regional with the German edition, with a conversation about Hoch hinaus, the new book by Raphael Röttgen. And our next episode of Space Café Moribas Vox Populi is also planned for the 3rd of December. It went live yesterday on Eventbrite. So, but here, stay tuned, are a few more very cool formats will come even this year. So our next usual planned 33-minute Space Cafés will be next week. I will talk with the wonderful Mari Eltholm from Norway about Norway's ambition, space ambition from oil to orbit. And on the 24th, I have the great pleasure and honor to talk with Professor Stephen Freeland from Sydney, in Sydney, about the Australian space ambition and the legal framework that rules that. This event will be then at 1 p.m. Central European time already, due to the time zone in Australia. And on 1st of December, I will talk with Claudia Kessler more about more women to space for the future of Earth. All events are online on Eventbrite. And as always, we would like to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletters. If you like to treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support will help us to continue our independent journalism for the news and these web talks here. Take your credit card and visit our fan shop as shown here at shop.spacewatch.global, and I can't repeat it enough. We need really your support to continue our work. Thank you very much for your interest today, to the audience and to the panel. And and of course, a thank you to the entire team behind the scenes to make this great job week by week again. I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you next week for the Space Café 33 minutes. In the meantime, visit our website and web shop, of course, and follow us on social media. So don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks, John.